Monsters represent our nightmares. They are metaphors for our deepest fears. They are the shadows of our conscience. What then does it mean when monsters become the object of our affection? Or when we become theirs? With Valentine's Day right around the corner, it seemed appropriate to explore the romantic side of human-monster interactions. And with that, we're going to start by journeying back to the early days of storytelling. Early myths often feature gods taking the form of animals or of strange hybrid creatures seducing mortals. There's the whole idea of the Minotaur, whose mother Pasiphae was tricked by the gods into falling in love with a bull, and thus was born the Minotaur. There's Zeus, who frequently took the form of animals or strange creatures to seduce women. Most notably Leda and the Swan, which was famously turned into a poem by William Butler Yeats. Speaking of, William Butler Yeats also wrote another poem called The Song of Wandering Angus, which was based on an old Irish folk tale. In this poem, Angus goes out wandering into the woods and fishes. He happens to catch a fish, brings it back with him, and magically the fish turns into a woman who then runs away. Angus, smitten with the fish woman, then spends the rest of his days searching the hills for this magical creature. And of course, other fairy tales use this idea as well. Probably most famously, there's Beauty and the Beast, in which Belle is forced to live with this beast, and then over time falls in love with the creature. Similarly, in The Little Mermaid, you have the story of a young mermaid who falls in love with a mortal man. Disney film ends a little happier than the original version. And not to be outdone by fairy tales, Shakespeare himself would play with the idea in Midsummer Night's Dream. Titania, queen of the fairies, is tricked into falling in love with Bottom, an actor who's rather obnoxious and at this point in the story also has the head of a donkey. It's done for laughs, but it also underscores this idea of beauty falling in love with something monstrous, which is a theme that we see over and over and over again in these stories. This all ties into the literary idea of the grotesque. Now, we use the word grotesque a lot these days to mean gross or ugly or foul, and that's an overgeneralization of the word. When we talk about it in literature, grotesque actually has a particular meaning to it. And it applies to things that are outside of nature. The idea of the grotesque was actually a response to the Age of Enlightenment, which was driven by reason and by an empirical sense of the world. We understood the world through our senses, through what we could actually experience of it. Grotesque literature and art emerged as a response to that idea. And so early on, you would see it in the works of writers like Jonathan Swift, who frequently used exaggeration and distortion in his characters, mostly for comic and satirical effect. But when we move into the 19th century, into the Romantic era, we actually see it taking on a darker presence. And this is perhaps most famously seen in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. The creature that Victor creates is an absolute abomination of nature. Victor knows it right from the beginning because he has these milky eyes. There's something inhuman about what he sees, and so he rejects the creature. The creature goes out into the world and finds himself rejected time and time again. He often wanders through scenes of beautiful nature, and he himself is aware of the contrast of his form against this beautiful nature. When we look at the film versions, Boris Karloff does an amazing job of bringing both the pitiable and the monstrous to life in this creature.
Good, good. We are friends, you and I. Friends. Good. Good.
And when we talk about grotesque characters, that's the duality that's at play here. The character, yes, is monstrous, but the character also deserves our pity. One infamous scene in both the book and the movie highlights this contrast beautifully. In the movie, the creature comes across a young girl named Maria playing by the river. The girl's not frightened by him. In fact, she goes up and gives him a flower, then shows him a game where they throw flowers into the water. When they run out of flowers, the creature, still wanting to play, picks up the girl and throws her into the lake. He sees that she's drowning, he panics, and he runs away. What the creature has done is truly monstrous. This is the death of a little girl. But at the same time, the creature's panic shows that it was an unintentional act on his part. This scene from the movie is actually a combination of two different scenes from the book. First, when the creature is first roaming around the woods by himself, he sees a girl drowning in the river. Instinctively, he saves the girl. However, the girl's father sees this horrible creature holding his girl, and he shoots at the creature and hits him in the arm. The creature runs off scared, not understanding what he did wrong. Much later in the book, after he's been rejected time and time again by society, he decides that he's going to find a child who won't judge him, a child who doesn't understand ugliness. And he will raise that child, and that child will grow up to love him. So, as he's walking through the city, he sees a young child, he grabs the child, and the child immediately screams and is horrified by the sight of the creature. The boy then reveals himself to be the brother of Victor Frankenstein, at which case the creature goes into a rage and murders the child. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, pins the murder on an innocent woman who was sleeping nearby. In the film version, the child is innocent to the creature's appearance, but in the novel, even a child can see that this creature doesn't belong. This is all to illustrate that the grotesque is both something that's within our world and something that doesn't belong in it, or something that stands in contrast to it. Works like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, The Phantom of the Opera, and Dracula all add a romantic element to this idea. In each of these stories, the creature pursues something and wants to bring it into his world, not unlike Hades and Persephone. And I think a lot of the imagery that you see really kind of relates to that idea, bringing the object of desire into some kind of underworld. The Hunchback tries to protect Esmeralda by bringing her back to his cathedral. The Phantom takes Christine into his underground lair underneath the opera house in Paris. And of course, Dracula has Carfax Abbey, which itself is a cavernous underworld kind of feel to it. But more than that, he wants to bring Mina into his eternal night. Make her like one of him. Most of the Universal films of the 30s and 40s would follow in the same pattern. The Mummy, the Wolfman, the Creature from the Black Lagoon, they all involved characters who had a bestial quality to them, or monstrous quality to them, who were also pursuing something mortal, something beautiful in the mortal world. One of the more nuanced and controversial films would come with the 1942 release of RKO Studios' Cat People from Jacques Tourneur. In this movie, a beautiful young woman believes she is descended from a race of people who turn into panthers when aroused by passion. Whether Irina actually suffers from this curse or not is pretty ambiguous for a good chunk of the movie, but the tension it creates with her new husband is all too real. Throughout the film, Irina tries to control her lust, but her jealousy ends up being just as dangerous when her husband starts to fall for another woman. In this case, the grotesque is psychological. Oliver is drawn to the strange and exotic Irina, who seems out of place in this world. This also signals a shift wherein the monster becomes the object of attraction instead of being the pursuer. Darkness becomes alluring and also more attractive. As the years go by, the monsters get, hotter. And hotter. And hotter. Even this guy. Vampires in particular become associated with a kind of sexual liberation. Movies like The Hunger, Habit, Interview with a Vampire, and so many others all revel in the allure and repulsion of life as a vampire. Though the monsters may be more attractive, the otherworldliness, the defiance of nature still exists. Clive Barker would go on to create whole worlds built on the grotesque. Barker's Cenobites are the ultimate perversion of humanity, yet humans regularly seek them out. The creatures that inhabit Midian and Nightbreed are both monstrous and pitiable. Then of course there's Guillermo del Toro, who sets his monsters against an even more monstrous humanity. The Shape of Water creates a beautiful romance between a human woman and Del Toro's version of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. But Del Toro replaces the creature's primal savagery with intelligence and soul, and makes the human antagonists the true monsters of the story. The grotesque doesn't just mean ugly or unappealing. It goes against nature, it goes against what we expect, and in that there is some appeal. Because it takes us out of the drabness, and let's face it, sometimes cruelty of this world. So remember, monsters need love too. So if you're out and about this Valentine's Day, and you come across a werewolf or a vampire, don't be afraid to give it a hug. It's probably all it's looking for. Until next time, stay monstery.